Great, thanks, Leah. This is a session about performance management, and the first thing to say about it is very much not a session that is meant to give answers, but rather one that's seriously meant to start a conversation and something. There are a number of motivations for talking about performance management. One of them is the assessment that we got yesterday. The question is sort of how can we all work together to move up performance a notch from what we have before. Got to start by thinking about what is the measure of the success of organizations like NNIP Partners. And we actually had a working group on this topic before. I hesitate to say it, but it was actually in 2007, which is a very long time ago. We never followed up on it or took advantage of what we began to learn then, but that's what we're trying to do now. But one of the conclusions of the working group, recognizing very early on that NNIP partners are not final outcome producers. You don't do rehab properties, you don't present daycare or early schooling. What NNIP partners produce is influence. In other words, data information comes out in a way that the mark of the success is how that flow of information causes other people to change their behavior and to produce useful outcomes and better outcomes. Well, how in the world influence? How in the world do you measure that? What do you do to enhance it? One way that all partners in NNIP develop a strategy for how they're going to influence it. Some of those strategies are much more explicit and much more complete than others, and I think we need to have some more conversations about the strategy side of enhancing the influence of the work we do. But another way to affect and enhance influence is clearly performance management. What is performance management? It means you've got to measure the influence you're having in a regular and consistent way, regular direct monitoring, or at least the attempt at regular and direct monitoring of how you're affecting the way people are thinking out there. One of the things our working group in 2007 came up with is very important. We thought we were starting to do a working group about evaluation. And we clearly said, this is not evaluation. This is not long-term evaluation done by outsiders. This is something that is owned by the managers of NNIP partner organizations. It's short-term, month to month. What impact are we having out there? What's changing because of what we do? And this was all motivated by one of the local funders who said, how do you know that you're making a difference? What are the measures that you have that indicate, how can you document that you're making a difference? And that's what really started it all. The central form that we took to sort of begin to put this thing together is to create a guidebook on the techniques that are out there and are not only being used by partners, but also out there that other organizations are doing to measure something similar. And so what we are going to begin to talk about is a guidebook that has an inventory of techniques and approaches. And we are truly delighted to have Jake Cowan back with us, who Jake was the principal author of the first effort to begin to create a guidebook along these lines. He's going to outline that for us today. And then we're going to then hear from two of our partners about how they see what they're doing about influence locally. Steve Spiker from Oakland and Rebecca Lee from Providence. And Jake will frame a larger discussion that we'll have at the tables. Jake?
Oh, yeah. I put 15, yeah. Thank you, Tom. I am really excited to be back with NNIP. As Tom mentioned, I last worked on this in 2007, and I've just been kind of wandering the planet since then, and I've found my way back, and there's at least 5 of you who were there in 2007, and so it's nice to see you again. And I met a number of you in St. Louis and had a much better opportunity to get to know many of you during the time here. And so I'm really happy to be back and working with you all, and I hope the work that we're doing will add value to the work that you're doing locally. And as Tom referenced too, I think a lot of I've had a number of nice tee-ups for this session during the week. The work that we're doing with performance management and what we're talking about here with influence really dovetails nicely with the talk that Peter just gave and the work that we did on Tuesday around the business plan process. And it even, I think, ties back to some of the work that was talked about in St. Louis in terms of communications as well. These things all fit together nicely. Put a little finer point on something that Tom started out with in terms of introductions, because some of you are embedded in organizations that do community impact work and achieve some of those end stage outcomes. But what we're really talking about with performance management, even if you're in an organization that does that work, is really isolating and thinking about monitoring influence around your data intermediary functions. So we're really targeting and narrowing specifically to that. And I wanted to take just a second at the outset of this conversation and talk about why you would do that in the first place, because most of you are doing some form of performance management work right now, some form of monitoring influence, and you know that you're investing staff and time in this work. I saw you pull your hair out thinking about your spreadsheets yesterday with regard to some of your work you're doing internally. So I think the first most direct tie to the business canvassing work is we talked about testing the hypothesis and of some of the assumptions that you're making across that business canvas process. And what you're getting when you pull together performance management data, when you pull together data about your influence, is you're really getting a better way to articulate your value proposition. You've got a set of data, a set of evidence that you can use in communicating really both internally and externally about the value of the work that your data intermediary functions are achieving. And really across these benefits, it's a nice way to think about these, is about that internal and external playoff. So it's both what you're able to do from a communication standpoint, but it's also because you're going to be able to do better work, because we're going to go into techniques and we're going to look at stages of influence, but the real core point of performance management, and it does and will continue to look different in every one of your cities, is it's the reflective activity of looking at what happened, was it what you expected, and how you can do it better. And that how you can do it better piece is that strategy piece. It's the how are we going to extend our influence and have a bigger impact. So to start to unpack what we mean by influence, what you see on the screen are 4 different stages of influence outcomes that we've started to conceptualize. And to walk through these just a little bit, and most of them are fairly self-evident. And we use the term that the user of stakeholder feels more familiar to you. The real idea here is that these are outcomes that are targeted at the people you are trying to target. And target is also actually a notion that sits on top all of these 4 types of influence as well, which is to say, if you're going to measure your influence, and if you're going to measure your performance, you have to measure it against something that you expected to have happened. And so the first, there's this idea that information reaches its intended users. This is about your target audience can find and access information. So, and there is obviously a progression here that sort of starts with that just basic mindset change all the way to a behavior change. And Sheila, you had asked on Tuesday, does data cause behavior change? The answer is sometimes. So users paying attention. This is just simply that users are engaged. So on the first bullet, you've got the information out on the web. It's there. People can access it. The second bullet, we're talking about, all right, they can actually get the information. They're engaging it. They're using it in some way. The third piece of this, when they're changing their mind, this is when you can actually measure an increase or, depending on the policy issue, a decrease in support for a particular point of view, support for an investment or resource allocation decision. And then the magic bullet number 4 is the users are actually taking action. So they are allocating resources in a new way. A policy has changed. New partnerships have come together to develop a plan, and they're implementing the plan. Some of what's at work across these 4 bullets is a theory of change or a so that chain. And we haven't mapped out a nice box of theory of change for all this stuff. But the basic idea is that while what we're talking about and how Tom framed this very well at the beginning is that data intermediaries are not responsible for increasing incomes locally or for improving unemployment outcomes. What each of these outcomes does do is it influences the local actors that control each of those outcomes. And so part of what we again are trying to then unpack is where do you fit in as NNIP partners in influencing those end stage outcomes. And so Kathy actually started us off on Wednesday by pulling back to the three NNIP functions, and these are of course very familiar to you all. And so you could make a chart like this for each of your cities, and the different X's would be in different places for all of your cities. So this is just to illustrate one way it might play out. But part of what we'd like you to think about, and this is where the management comes into performance management, because first of all, in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about measurement techniques. So part of the measurement aspect of this is looking across the first function, for example, in your community profile work. How far along this so that chain or this theory of change or these sets of outcomes, where do you expect to have the most influence with your community profiles? It might just be that given the local context in which you work in, you really only expect that information will reach folks and that they'll be able to engage with it, but you're doing a whole nother set of activities that gets them to change their mindset or take action. Or it might be that for your city, you have X's all across that top row because community profiles are the core piece of your work, and you're doing programming around that actually gets you to people changing their minds and people taking action based on those profiles. But the way this also gets into management and speaks to some of the things Tom started with as well is you're actually having that conversation of to stay on community profiles. As an example is if you've got X's all across this and you say, we know that our community profiles, our goal with that is to have a targeted set of users, a targeted set of actors take a specific set of actions. What is your strategy to get there? So finding out, and we'd like to have some conversation about that, if that's what you're trying to achieve with your profiles or with a particular report you've produced or with training that you're doing, what are the sets of activities that lead up to that? I always call drinking water when I do a presentation now my Marco Rubio moment. All right. So measurement techniques. Now, first of all, and Tom had referenced, we started a guidebook 7 years ago. And what was one of the fun things about it was looking at things like content analysis and noticing that there is no reference to social media whatsoever. And also an extensive write-up on how hard it is to get website statistics. So there's some changes and updating that we have underway. But the other point on this stuff is you all know how to do these things in most cases, and you're already doing them in other contexts, or even specifically in this context. So we don't intend to do a deep dive on measurement techniques, but rather just to have these up there and talk about at a high level how they apply to each of the functions that you do and to some of those influence outcomes that we talked about. So when you're talking about information reaching intended users, that's really something you can look at web stats for, or content analysis. And I'm not even sure if content analysis is the term anymore. There was actually a really nice, whatever you're doing to look at your Twitter to do your analysis of your reach with Twitter. That's also something you can do to find out if information is reaching your intended users. For users paying attention, that's a straightforward follow-up survey. That's a type of technique you can use there. And mindset changes if you're trying to find out if people are supporting supporting a particular position or thinking about it differently, you can target a specific set of people, and again, you're looking at surveys on that. But the other two things, one on this list, one not, the idea of case studies. And across all these techniques, as you well know, there are very informal and very formal ways you can go about these activities. And I think one of the things we want to emphasize in this work and hear more from you all are what are the informal ways you're doing this, because one of the chief barriers in getting started with this work is getting started with this work, because it seems like a big hairy deal of the big survey that you've got to put out, and you have to put a structure and a process around that. And that might work great for your organizations, but if it's too intimidating to think about starting a performance management process, make 2 phone calls a week and ask folks reflective questions. 2 a week might be a stretch, 2 a month, and you've got 24 data points for an entire year that can help you inform some of the work that you're doing on the program side. And the local user panel, that the folks that were up here just a second ago actually have another bullet on here that we should actually add, which is just straightforward, direct observation. They were looking at, you heard them talking about, Asim, I think you talked about 25% of your users to be from the community. You check your registration data, and if you're not making that target, you go out and recruit. That's straightforward performance management of using information to feedback into how you get the gold star. So the next couple of slides here, and then I'm going to have Rebecca and Steve come up and talk. I just called you Steve. I'm sorry. Did people call you Steve and get in trouble? All right. Spike and Rebecca will be up in a second. But I just wanted to go over a couple very bread and butter performance measurement points here. So first of all, again, getting started is the hardest part. And there's a couple of ways to think about getting started up here. Peter actually talked about in the business plan and the business canvas process involving staff and how important that is, and the same principles apply here, both in terms of getting ideas, but also one of the nice things about performance management in this data is when you've got a big team, or even if you have a team of 2, it creates a conversation about what are your goals, what are you trying to achieve, how you are measuring them, so that you're moving forward together in alignment. But the other point here, and the last bullet, and I'll make it with the point with the slide here, is it's not a linear process at all. Again, you can start at any point. And again, if having a particular process in place is something that works for your organization, you can collapse 2 of these arrows and put it together in whatever way works for you locally. But the point is, you can go through a process, but if doing a process is going to be something that's hard to start with, if you're going to take an action commitment like Peter to do something like this today, just jump in and apply this in some way. And again, it's pull up your TA request, find 2 people that have put something in, make a phone, call them up and say, did you get what you needed? How did you use it? What else could we have done for you? There are some really simple ways to jump into this that don't necessarily require a lot of the formal process. And so this actually is the list. I feel like when Spike, the communications group that you did at the unconference, we sort of pull it out. You could pull this across a few different threads as well. I think the main point that I'd like to say here is one of the key places performance management always breaks down is it doesn't feel like it's useful or doesn't feel like it's valuable. You're making the phone calls, you're doing the surveys, you're looking at your websites and your web stats, and you look at it and you say, I don't know what this means, it's not doing anything for me, it's just not adding value and helping my work. If you're doing that work right now and you're having that moment, or if you listen to this panel today and you hear, I don't know how that would work for me, this is not being live streamed, so this is an okay time to say, I don't know why this matters for me, and I don't know why this is valuable, and we'd actually love to hear that perspective if that's something that's going through your head, because that's something that we need to hear so that we can calibrate some of the work we're doing so that it better serves you. And so these are just a couple of ways it looks like in practice, and then we'll turn it over to practitioners who can talk about how it works in their organization. But just a few very basic ways performance management can play out in your organizations that are signs that it has taken hold and it is useful and valuable to you. So the first is this concept of just having it part of your regular review meetings. You have a weekly staff meeting, a monthly staff meeting. You all have some sort of regular way you all get together. So including as a part in the agenda of those conversations, how are we we doing and what do we know about how we are doing, because we've applied some of these measurement techniques. So looking at that data. Again, thinking about this as an engagement tool to articulate your value proposition, talk to your funders and board members about some of the data you're getting, get them on board with what your value proposition is, and share this data with them. And then the third, and at least for my own personal proclivities in performance management, the holy grail is you're using the data to actually adjust and change your strategy. So you've learned something from the information that you've got, and you're able to, in this real-time way, which is very different from evaluation. These are techniques that, especially if you do them informally, you could start them tomorrow. If you want to put a more formal spin on them, you can still start with them. You've got the capacities internally that you can do these in a month. And so that's, I think, what I want to leave you on is the notion that I've heard from some of you in conversations this week, and those that responded to Leah's inquiry about your current practices, that there's a wide variety of practice, but I think the common theme is just about everybody's doing a little bit of something, and there's different degrees of formality, and so there's a way that someone else is doing in this network that can work for you, and so we want to create this conversation so you can start to hear about these things. And so first up, and we didn't agree on order, I guess, but paper, scissors, rock. I'll ask Rebecca to come up since she's closer. And I believe I agreed with Rebecca and coerced her to be on this panel that her presentation will reflect the faces in the crowd, look at how they're doing performance management work at the Providence Plan. So I'm excited for you to hear from her, and then Spike will follow.
Don't worry, it won't go long. Oh. All right. Should probably go down here. So I just want to, again, preface this by saying that when we were talking with Jake, we were kind of like, yeah, we kind of do that. There's nothing real formal, but I'll just give you some examples of what we talked about how we kind of do this. And I'll start with the one that probably sounds the best. So the Providence Plan has been going through a strategic planning process, kind of wrapped it up a few months ago. And as part of that, each of the different programs had to come up with some key desired outcomes and strategies for achieving those outcomes. So the info group kind of came up with a few fairly quantitative focused outcomes that we were going to strive for. And these included increasing the number, breadth, and quality of our data products, increasing the number of users across all of the different web applications, increasing the use of particularly the Rhode Island Data Hub data for research purposes, and improving public policy decision-making in certain sectors, which is kind of crazy. So we kind of committed to those, which was really good. I think I don't have a PowerPoint because we haven't really done much formally. We don't really have a holistic approach to performance management. But for these particular things, they seemed, well, we can measure those. This is doable. And so we set them up, and we had some great ideas for actually following through with doing them. But I think one of the things that we really struggle with is having these really, okay, we're going to do this, we can do this, and then really losing steam and not necessarily following up. Or kind of fumbling along trying to follow up. So just to give an example, in terms of increasing the number of users across different web applications, we definitely, it's an easy enough thing to do now, is to figure out how many people are hitting our different sites. But then kind of going into a deeper dive has been really kind of problematic. We struggle with devoting the time to do it. We have a communications intern who is great, and we invite him to staff meetings once every month or so, basically. And kind of he goes over some of the stats with the staff, and we talk about what we can learn from those data. So I guess, then we kind of think about, okay, we have some really audacious goals, I think, in terms of trying to increase the number of users, and we do talk about what are some strategies for actually accomplishing that. But then again, translating that into kind of formal action steps has been really tough. So that's kind of one one area where we do some performance management-y sort of things. Another thing that we've been working on is following up with folks who we provide technical assistance to. In the past, we just did it, and then maybe we'd get an anecdote here and there from folks saying, hey, this is how we used the data that you were able to provide us, or the map that you gave us, or something like that. But really kind of driven out of a need to find funding and justify the value of the technical assistance that we were providing. We have tried to do a more concerted effort to follow up with these folks that we're helping. So it's literally just calling them up and asking, how did you use this map or whatever it is that we provided them? And then kind of documenting it and building a case for funding for that sort of work, but also trying to then figure out how, okay, holistically, this is how people are using it, and this is the feedback that we're getting. How can we kind of build that need and that use into some of our funded projects? So that's kind of another example of how we're sort of doing performance management. And then I guess the last one I would just say is, I talked a little bit about the data story process, but I think along the way, we really try to check in with folks who are part of that process to see how things are going. Are they going well? Are they not going well? And kind of that informs how we adjust the process accordingly based on that. And then at the end, we do try to, again, figure out how the process and how the product is actually going to be useful and how they're going to use it at the end. So I think that's probably, those are three kind of examples, and we really do struggle with this. I can't emphasize that enough. It's really, I mean, part of it is just time. You know, we would love to have more time to think through these things, and we definitely recognize the value. But then actually committing to and continuing and sustaining the work on an ongoing basis is really hard. And trying to do it, again, not instead of a piecemeal, it feels very piecemeal approach to me. So having kind of more of a holistic approach, I'd love to learn from everyone else. So.
Should have probably thought that through. I always hate following up from Providence because they just do really good work. It's a little intimidating at times. All right, good old F5. Back on a Windows machine. All right. Okay, so measuring success. I was a little surprised when I got asked to be on this panel. Full disclosure. So we're 27 years old. We do all these things. We incubate new projects and programs. We innovate. We do this applied research and mapping, and we do a lot of strategic planning, facilitation, and policy work. So how many of you, quick check, how many of you do more than just the data-y stuff in your organization? There's a lot of us, right? There's a few. Okay, so that's a third. So there's a bunch of us that aren't just data shops. That's us too, which is always sometimes of a weird mix. So this is our performance management plan. It's pretty sweet. It's not animated. This is it. 10 for 10. Maybe we lose a point now. So this is. I just did. So it's a challenge, and part of it's driven. The excuses are here, right? And these are the excuses that where we have this intermediary curses that we don't serve people, we don't directly get someone off food stamps or get someone a GED. We don't do that, so we don't serve people. So the things we do aren't sexy. The things we do aren't big, bold milestones that foundations love to see. And we don't do a lot of repeated stuff, and so we're not able to say we ran 50 workshops, and we do things uniquely, nichely, over and over again in different ways that don't allow a really nice, clean model of this is a metric we use to say that we did X of this service. And then we've started to, but I was thinking of it a level higher than the pragmatic level we've been talking about, which is reassuring, is that we've started to do a little bit of this, but not as much. Of starting to track what's happening with our stuff, how it's being used, what it's getting, what it's doing. So we've started to do a little bit of that. But the funny thing about all this is, like a lot of you, is that we help other people to perform this measurement, and we manage collective impacts, in which we manage shared measurement systems for large, bold initiatives. And so we do it outwardly, but we don't do it inwardly. This is not live, right? It's not streamed live. But the problem is that we really believe that our work matters, and people often tell us that our work matters. And how do you deal with the fact that you're not collecting a ton of data on the exact things that you do? And how do you deal with the fact that I often run into people all over the city and the Bay Area that haven't got a clue we exist? And when I tell them about it, they're like, damn, that's an awesome thing. That's a great organization. I love what you guys do, but I'd never heard of you. And just to be blunt, that's a dumb problem to have, because we do good things. People tend to like us. Few people don't, but there's an election coming. And it's dumb that people don't know about a great organization in their city that does good work, that makes a lot of change, that is open to a lot of adjustment and considering how our work fits and can benefit others, and we give a lot of services out, and people don't know about us. And it's not just a marketing problem, it is a communications problem, it's a marketing problem, but it's more than that, is that people don't know what we do and why it matters, and that clearly significantly hurts us in our sustainability, because if people don't know you're doing good work, why would they want to approach you with money? Why would they want to approach you with new services? And if they go to your website, and probably my single biggest failure in 8 years is that we haven't actually rebuilt our website. In my term, and that's very sad. But they won't find what we do on our website because it's ancient and horrible. But again, our work matters. And so we've been pushing for the last few years on trying to communicate more and tell people about what we're doing. And we've failed at consistent newsletter publication because people won't write content. So we don't have a culture of publishing and building content, creating stories, creating content for people to actually consume that will get it. So we don't have that culture yet, and it's a really hard thing, to be honest, to actually instill in a lot of organizations. And again, our work matters. We want people to know about it and what we're achieving. And so we started this process of looking not just at we don't want to do an annual report because whatever, no one's asked us. Our grantors, makers don't ask for an annual report from us, so we've never had any motivation to do it. But we wanted to really start putting out there, this is actually what we're about and what we achieve. Partly it's a way for us to start thinking about what are we actually doing, what are we achieving? Because we do a lot and we're stuck in the work a lot, but like, what is it that we're actually succeeding in, and what are our wins, and what is our impact? Because we often don't quite get it because we're banging into the next project and things just fall together. And so in this process, it was a little lengthy. For the first time around, I think it'll be a lot lengthier for most organizations. After that, I think this will get faster for us. So we started to think about, well, we don't really have a lot of hard data, but what can we measure? What are the things that we could potentially measure that would allow us to tell the story about what that meant? And it was this type of stuff. It was, we help people put plans into action, and we help communities take action, and we provide information to help communities fight and push for change. And we get policies in place or policies changed, and we raise a lot of public awareness. And these are the things that we actually achieve, and this is the type of impact we have, yet we don't put that out there as the story about this is what we actually achieve. We just put data out there, and we put boring policy papers out there that few people care about, but so what, right? For the large majority of people, that doesn't connect, and as I've heard it a number of times this week, no one reads an 80-page report. They read the exec summary. So what are we giving to people that they can act on and use, and what are we achieving through all this huge amount of work that we're doing and putting out there? And so those were the things that we started to think about. Well, what is the impact in each of these areas? What policies, wins are we getting, and what are the things that we've pushed for change on, and where are those things being successful? And it's things like, Steve and John were involved in this amazing report on investor acquisition of houses, foreclosures, and it was a report, and if the measurement was a report, like that's kind of, whatever. But if the measurement, the impact is that we saw policy change in the city. We saw a complete awareness across the city of people starting to actually talk about and think of, is this a good thing for our city or a bad thing? And so we saw some real impact from that, but until now, we didn't bother to tell anyone about the impact from that report. We just gave them the report, and it was awesome. but that wasn't enough. And so we started to, this was a culture shift, force ourselves to talking more, a little more story form, not enough, about what we're doing rather than the data and the stuff. And then what it means to the people, so the flow-on effects, and then what we actually enable. So we're a big enabling organization. We don't do everything ourselves, but we certainly enable a lot of other people to achieve things, and that's an impact for us. And so despite all these things that we thought were really good, that with the impacts that we were having in the MedSense, we still got some feedback from some snarky people at Stanford that, I love the impact report, but I'd love to see the impact next time. I was like, didn't quite know what to take away from that. So people will sometimes not care and sometimes think that we needed to move the numbers on poverty. And to be honest, that was the thing that sort of shook me a little bit early on. A few years ago, someone asked me the question, like, given a pitch of we're an anti-poverty organization, social justice, all those good things. And then he said, so your mission is to eliminate persistent poverty, so how are you doing? I was like, wow. And it took me a minute to respond. And I had to say, if I'm honest, if I'm a data-driven geek, I have to say that we've failed collectively as a movement in the Bay Area to eliminate persistent poverty because it hasn't. The needle's gotten lower. It's worse. There are more people in bad situations. We've helped a lot of people on the way and things have gotten better in ways, but our impact hasn't been enough. And so that was a really big challenging thing for me to start thinking about what are we achieving? Because it isn't eliminating persistent poverty very fast. And so if we're not doing that, are we doing things that are good and meaningful? And that's a really big challenge for an organization. Have a business canvas to understand what your value propositions are and what you offer, but to think about what you're achieving. You know, often for us, it wasn't exactly the thing that we'd love to have been achieving. We'd love to have seen persistent poverty gone, right? We haven't. But we have achieved things and had impacts that are really significant that without that, things would be worse. And so rethinking what your value is to your community has been a really big goal, a big takeaway from us in this. And it was different than what we thought it would be. And so I think despite the wanting to feel like we're doing service provision and doing things that mean something to people, the reality is we don't do that, but we've been able to sort of go through this process and think about, well, what are we actually achieving? And without being able to have your staff aware that the things you're doing matter and are moving the needle on things that matter, you're just going through the motions of doing social justice or community data. And so it's been a big enlightening process, and it's been a big challenge. But I think it's setting a good trend for us to start thinking more about this stuff in future, including getting a bit more granular on traditional performance management things, which we need to get serious about too. So thanks, John.
I was going to get it, but I think we can just do the mics from here. Steve and Rebecca, I wonder if we can, and we'll open this up to questions. I'm just going to get the ball rolling a little bit. And there are some discussion questions on the nice little write-up in the manual as well that we'll use for this conversation. But you both touched on a little bit performance management and measuring success and defining what you achieve in your organizations. I'm wondering if you could give just a little more detail on what the conversations are in your organization. And Spike, you've referenced specific things around it surprised you and it wasn't what expected. And Rebecca, you talked about the struggle. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that, just to paint a little bit of a picture of what happens inside your offices.
Great. Just moved away from the microphone. That's a hint. We have silos, and we've been pushed for a more multidisciplinary team approach, and it hasn't been a big hit yet, hasn't happened yet. It's slowly changing. So we have people in the organization that have no idea about what the other people are achieving and what the wins are. And so there was a really illuminating process in some of the discussions about, like, we've done that, that's brilliant. I didn't know we'd actually achieve that. Like, I'd never touched that piece of work, yet I see some really good stuff happening. And so that's encouraging to see that the organization is achieving more than just your little team, your group, whatever it is. And I think we had some really hard conversations about when we listed out all the things we had achieved, what we're going to consider including, is that we had disagreements on what was the impacting part of that and what was the story related to that should be told. Is it this part of it or is it this part? And did this matter or did this matter? So it was really good, I think, for us organizationally to think about, out of the things we've done, what were the pieces that mattered and what were the stories, what were the impacts that we should tell? and that varied among staff. So it's a really good exercise because you'll disagree, and that's cool, but it forces you to actually understand how people think and what we perceive as value, which is important when you consider what sort of work you're going to do down the track.
Yeah, I guess I would just echo a couple of things in terms of the conversations that we're having. We also have just finished a strategic planning process and are starting a branding process. And that's been really illuminating in terms of trying to describe who we are and what we do. I think we've done a lot of legwork and groundwork in terms of coming to some sort of consensus around what that looks like, but then trying to describe it and then figure out how do we hold ourselves accountable to that, and how do we on an ongoing basis kind of reflect on that has been challenging. And I completely lost my other thought, but I just want to say something that Spike mentioned in there that I think is really interesting is this idea of a culture shift. Now I can remember. We also, even within our group, we kind of have had silos, and people don't necessarily feel like they know what impact other projects and other team members are having. And so we also are trying to, through various means, have this conversation about what are you doing? Like, oh, you presented this, you made this data product, and we had no idea, and it had this impact. So just trying to slowly shift the culture to be much more collaborative and thoughtful and communicative about what is happening, I think.
In a completely self-serving way, I'd like to make a connection between some of the stories that you're telling and some of the framework that Tom and I presented and really this reflects the good work that was actually done by NNIP partners on this to put some of this framework together earlier. The notion of, first of all, that this has been an activity that's internal to your organizations and that your whole staffs are involved with, or multiple team members, I think is one important thing that resonates with me. But also thinking about how whether you, in some ways, I think the framework we're presenting, we're calling these concepts influence. The most important thing about influence, and the most important thing is understanding and agreeing on some of the concepts we're measuring. If you call it something else, you're not doing it wrong, which is to say impact report sounds way sexier than influence report. And so just taking a second to recognize that. I'm sure we have questions from you, and I actually have a question for you all too that I'd be interested in you all reflecting on. But before we do that, Tom's got a question.
It's not so much of a question, but just a comment on all of this I have thought about since we started it again. And it relates to a task that I think we're going to have to begin to take on centrally. I guess my overall conclusion is that the value of the work that you do, surprise, surprise, is enormously undervalued. Let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, I always remember a conversation I had lunch with Bruce Katz a couple of years after he started doing what he does at Brookings, which is all about trying to influence. And I said, what's the biggest surprise, really, in doing this work that you've had? And Bruce is a very much recommendations-oriented guy, and he said, I thought what was going to be important from our work was these clever recommendations we were going to be making. He said, that has never been important. What has been important of the things that we've done is producing information that change the way people think about the world, that change the conventional wisdom, creating surprises about how the world operates and how badly it operates and where it operates badly, things that people didn't know anymore, that just automatically change the policy game. And that's stuff that's extremely hard to measure. A second example that I really would like to think about more that is striking for me. Lisa Nelson, Cleveland Federal Reserve, wrote a case study for us about the neo-can-do system in Cleveland. Read that case study, and you recognize, wait a minute, well, building a system doesn't influence it. Boy, does it influence. I think people in Cleveland that are involved in property transactions, pretty much everybody behaves differently because of the existence of the system. A lot of sleazy guys say to themselves, oh, I can't get away with what I used to get away with because there's this data system out there and it won't work anymore. But it's also people are collaborating around the same, they're all operating from the same information base. And people have argued that the amount of disagreement when you come in a neighborhood to decide about which building to demolish, which one to rehab and so forth, it doesn't end disagreement, but it sort of softens it. It doesn't, it's a more rational dialogue. And I think that my own opinion is that the contribution of the system itself, which is now the basis for almost all of the decisions that are made by the land bank in Cleveland, is number one, the contribution is enormous, and number two is we don't know how to measure it and how to really make that case. We haven't made it well yet. But this is something I think that we need to think about centrally, and working with all of you to think about how to make it clearer, to find a way to display the importance of those changes.
Let's see what questions we've got out in the audience.
This is Katie from Woodstock Institute. I wanted to share a little bit about what we do. We use Salesforce as a contact management system and use it also to track our TA that we provide. We put presentations and press clips in there. And when we enter a TA session, it automatically sends a survey to the recipient saying, are you satisfied with what you got? What did you use it for? And that captures sort of their immediate impressions, but not so much the long-term impact. And I really like this idea of doing follow-up phone calls to see, hey, did your grant application get funded, or did that policy actually work out? Because that's, I think, the harder thing to track. But I had questions for you. Like, how do you determine your benchmarks? Like, say we provided 200 hours of TA last year. Is that enough? Is it enough that it was more than last year? Or like, how do you know it's adequate? And also how you staff these evaluation tasks, because my theory is it's better to decentralize it. If you perform TA, you enter it in, because it's more likely to happen if you do it immediately rather than tasking one or two people to do it who have to remember to ask you, did you perform TA this month? Or you might forget that you did it. But it's hard to get people to actually enter stuff into the system. So I'm interested in how you staff these things.
So I guess I'll, so to answer your first question, we don't do any benchmarking. We don't necessarily have a goal of how many hours that we're gonna, of TA will provide, or how many different individuals or organizations will help. But in terms of staffing it and dealing with that, we use a time tracking software where we enter basically a little bit of detail about what we're spending our time on, and there's a project code for kind of unfunded technical assistance. So that basically gives us a nice record of what we've done in terms of hours and who and all of that. So then kind of on a somewhat regular basis, it's usually our intern who then does a follow-up phone call with a few of the people who benefited from the TA, and then kind of just documents what they have to say.
And I think the other small piece I can add to this too, and I think poor George from New Orleans wasn't feeling well, but if he were here, he could probably speak to some of the nice work they do in New Orleans around this. And I believe they actually now you can't automate the follow-up phone call, but they actually have it built into their knowledge management system. The survey goes out after 30 days or something like that, so that at least the collecting the information happens in an automated sense. So they're able to get some information that way. And if others have, since others are asking questions about practice, if you all are doing this a different way in your city, feel free to jump up and add what you're doing as well, please.
Steve here from Oakland. Just wanted to add a little on to what Spike said. One of the things we did in preparation for that impact report, it was something that really grew out of a comment from a funder that said something about that they weren't seeing the authentic demand for our work in Oakland. And so we started, to look for these ways to quantify that impact. And we reached out to all of our sort of long-term partners. And so systems leaders, the superintendent of the school district, base building organizations, and had them write letters, sort of, with their experience of what our work has meant to them over the years. And that was really powerful. It provided a lot of content for that impact report. And so it's probably not something you can do on an annual basis to reach out for that kind of input, but it was really valuable to see that that come back into us and us be able to use it in our fundraising and in that report. So,
did you have a survey that you sent out, or did you just make phone calls and sort of talk through it, or how did you?
Yeah, it was really just relying on the personal relationships and asking for their help.
So I'm always trying to get to something quantifiable that doesn't require a whole lot of qualitative time, because nobody really has too much time, especially phone calls are actually really hard. So we actually did a website redesign on a pretty shoestring budget last year, and we had a wonderful woman who told us that the most important thing about your website is your reputation score, which is how many other reputable organizations are linking to your site. And that is kind of a little powerful thing that we can track, that you can watch your reputation score actually increase, because in the end, that's what we are as an intermediary, right, in that network, that if the library system's connecting to you and the city government is connecting to you and all the other nonprofits in your organizations are actually connecting to you, then they clearly value what you do. And then the other thing that I get is the Google alerts for anybody that uses our name in things that they put up on the web. And I track that because people are blogging using our data, and again, trying to find people that are using us, and the Google alerts every week that shows me either organizations that are using us, people that are using us, communities that are using us is a good way for me to keep track of who's doing what, but then also a way to track quantitatively who really is using our information.
So we're, the Housing Finance Policy Center at Urban is obviously not an NNIP partner, but we also are an intermediary, and one of the things we've been trying to track is inbound phone calls from important people. And there are more of them than you think there are, and they are incredibly important when somebody picks up the phone and calls you. So it's worth tracking.
Hi, Sabina Dietrich from Pittsburgh, and I'll follow up my two quantitative colleagues with some qualitative comments. Jake and Tom, you're starting in the beginning talking about what performance management is, and also, Tom, why it's different from program evaluation, which you described as long-term, done by an external retrospective, though it could be prospective. And then, Spike, you ended with the question the person said, what are you doing for poverty? That clearly is evaluation, not performance management. I'm thinking about the stories that you've told many, many times over these meetings, and one is you developed an app for people in Oakland and your area who could find what stores took food vouchers or food stamps. The kinds of things you've done, a lot of those in the performance management are improving quality of life. The long-term evaluation standard would be reducing poverty, which a lot of the organizations that you're working with, that's their goal. And ultimately, it's your goal too. But you set up a lot of things that improve quality of life for folks who are currently in poverty or experiencing income constraints that make their lives go better. And those fit, I think in Tom's long term, that might fit the medium and short term, Tom, of your distinctions of performance management. So I think you kind of ended up back to where you started, that you have a lot of stories and they're good. So for that person, you could have said, well, poverty is certainly a long-term standard and a goal of ours, but in the meantime, a lot of the things coming out of Oakland strategies are about improving folks' quality of life. And let me give you 6 stories there.
And I think there's a piece that's important there of the language we use needs to match up with what we do. And we've had internal and board discussions over and over about, is that really our mission? Are we pointed at that? And there's a lot of honest disagreement about that. So it is important when you present yourself as a certain type of organization to do a certain thing. If you're not doing that, you've got to, there's a harmonic dissonance there. Like, you're not doing the things that people expect you to do. And you can tell the story and make it clear why it matters, but it's also a good example to force you to say, well, let's rethink what we tell people we're about, because if we're not about X then, and we're not directly doing X, then we probably would be smarter to call ourselves something slightly different without losing our values and our ideals, but being more honest about what we're actually trying to do. Because so that's a really good point, because it does force you to think about, well, what are we here to do? So it's a really good bump for that item of discussion, which is a long discussion.
Well, and to put even a finer point on it, it is the entry point for any of the performance management type of work, because you can't measure success unless you've answered that question for what you define as success. So you're right, we did come full circle.
Hi, I was thinking about the book that's coming out very soon, right? With the case studies in it. And so we have some collected case studies about how neighborhood data is affecting people. And I was wondering if I was thinking about a funnel that maybe we could use, where the widest part of the funnel is sort of the people we serve, and we collect more information on fewer people as we go down the funnel. And at the bottom of the funnel is these case studies where we're really documenting impact. But I think the tough part is causality, because as we've been talking about, we don't reduce poverty, but we enable other people to reduce poverty. And so if you try to attribute results to what you've done, it's a pretty tough thing to do. But getting our partners who are working with our data to talk about, again, how important our data was in having that effect is something that we can really only do in a narrative sort of case study form. So I was just sort of thinking about, setting up a system where we create this funnel, and at the bottom of the funnel is these really rich case studies, but along the way is less information about more people that we've affected. And then on the Google Alerts thing, I got an email this morning from my assistant who does a Google Alert for all of our staff and for our organization. And apparently I've started a ukulele orchestra in the Black Hills. So.
I would just add to that, I mean, your comment and a couple other comments have surfaced. I think one of the things that's really challenging about performance management is some of the best ways to document influence and document impact are very unsatisfyingly not quantitative. They're very much qualitative, and they're very much about stories that you can't automate that information. So I think that's just an inherent tension in the work, and the more we can continue a conversation about it and find where folks are finding better ways to get that information, I think is really important to being able to do all of this work better. But the other thing I think I wanted to mention that touches on your comment is, I think part of what we really tried to capture in this notion of influence is just that other tension that you can't connect causality to the work you're doing. And so putting a framework around what are the things that you can measure that you do that are important, and then because then at the back end of those stages of influence is behavior change. So you might have caused the behavior change, but even that's not the causality, the impact that you're talking about. You just know that you've had the influence on that actor to do something different, and then the thing that they do different is the thing that gets to the causality and the change. Tom?
A somewhat contrary view is, well, that's okay. Some of the NNIP stories are so compelling that even though you can't measure causality, everybody knows that it was the study that a partner in this city did that caused that information caused the council to change the position it used to have on the budget. Or lots of the stories that we have documented are cases where laws got changed, and there's just nobody locally has any doubt about the fact that it was the data provided by our partner that did that. Okay, so that's not random controlled trial, but but it seems to me that, well, a couple of things. First of all, we're not telling enough of these stories. This is a commitment. We are all recognizing that our story production rate is lower than it ought to be because there are great stories out there that we're not capturing. And just doing that is going to elevate a lot. And then spending more time thinking about how we can make this into maybe not always quantified, but more credible and solid and believable stuff is worth doing.
Hi, my name is John from Oakland, and this is half-baked because that's how I roll. But I will say that we work at an organization that uses tools such as policy, advocacy, but we strongly focus on process. So we look at collaboration, we look at data-driven decision-making. These are values propositions. These aren't value propositions. And what you're talking about in performance is measuring value. You're measuring the investment versus the impact. But we value the values that we bring. The reason why someone would contract with us instead of a consultant is because we bring with it the community value. We bring with it the social equity lens. I was wondering, I know in wonky terms, this is sort of the intersection between process management and performance management. But if anyone has, I was really excited to hear where you're talking about you're measuring how many community members are signing up because it fulfills a values proposition. So is there a way that people have been using a values measure instead of a value measure within this performance management framework you're speaking of? And one more caveat, that's just against this landscape that we're oftentimes looking for funding, and that funding and those contracts don't necessarily match up with the mission statements of our organizations. So at times, how do our values that are incorporated in our mission statement fulfill themselves within these disparate contracts that we're often fishing for? So yes, and that's like a quarter bait.
That was at least 2/3.
I think those are responses over there.
Yeah, I have a question, but not a response to your question.
Should we get to the responses? There's a couple of people over there I think wanted to respond, so given that none of us are game.
Sorry. So this is partly a response and partly a question, if I can shoehorn them both in. One of the responses is just still a lot of the different comments. There's a lot of organizations that work on what they would call systems change initiatives. I think a lot of the partners are in that ballpark. So consequently, there's also a body of literature about how to evaluate systems change initiatives. And that's evaluation and performance management are different things, but it talks about how you would evaluate the success of policy advocacy, about information sharing, a lot of those different things. And I think that literature would resonate for a lot of questions that people are asking. Also, unfortunately, it gives up on causality in almost all the cases. It's really qualitative, narrative-based, but it is what it is. And I think a review of some of those things would probably speak to some of the things that you're trying to answer. And I know a lot of other people are trying to answer the same things. The question, if I can shoehorn it in, is I was struck by Jake's slide with the table about the 3 different activities: disseminating, applying data to achieve impact, and the civic capacity. And the only X's for changing behavior, mindset, and action were that middle activity about applying data to achieve impact. And I kind of think, maybe this is not shared, but like that's sort of the point of doing this kind of work. And if you're only getting those things through this middle activity, why do the other things? And I know there's good answers for that, but I'm curious if anybody said, like, actually there's less of one of these other activities or something. We should do less of something based on our performance management framework. There's something we should cut out because it's not getting at our core purpose. So I'm just curious from people's experience if there's things they've done less of.
I'd be happy to hear some reflections from you all on that as well. I think part of how we some of this is thinking about the sweet spot where you expect to see some level of impact, but it certainly, this table was not meant to apply. A lack of X doesn't mean it's not possible. It was really thinking about just what the measurement technique can probably best capture. But I think Scott's asked a very important question.
we have a little bit of an experience on it. So we made a decision, I guess somewhat performance management based, that after doing some evaluations of organization projects that we work with, we decided that we couldn't effectively perform as an organization the things that were core to us by also evaluating our partners if we're going to evaluate honestly. And we had evaluations that showed massive failures in big funded projects, and that put us in a massively awkward position where that organization would refuse to share data which was critical to our work, and they were part of collaboratives and tables that we were managing. And so we had to, so it was a bit of an evaluation or an assessment of our own values. So do we want to be honest and true as evaluators, and do we want to build productive partnerships? And we had to actually pull back from a few contracts that were interesting because we decided that organizationally we needed to be independent, but we also needed to maintain good relationships. And if we found that those two things for us were a conflict. We've since taken on some with other partners, and that conflict has raised itself again. And so for us, it's not a numbers-based thing, it's a how do we function and achieve our impact. And some of that has seen us change the type of work we do, because we realize that and we've had disagreements, but we've struggled to do the types of things we want to do and do other things as well. And some things haven't been compatible, so we've had to make some of those calls.
I wanted to speak to the question about how to measure values in addition to value, and I think having a good contact management system can help with that. With ours, whenever we enter a new contact, we have to categorize what type of organization they're with. So when we're reporting on our TA, we can say like 80% went to community organizations, or 60% of our presentations were at community organizations. But again, that's a whole process thing, and have to implement that. And I think in terms of process and collaboration, I don't know if there's a satisfying way to document that quantitatively, because you can say we met 8 times, we had 80% attendance. That's not super satisfying. So I think that is really going to be reliant on narratives of what the value of the collaboration is, or maybe interviewing some of the members of the collaboration or things like that.
I'm gonna preface, like you guys did earlier, with I don't think I'm gonna articulate this well, but a lot of our most effective work is done in really close partnership with actors in the community. And I feel like that ends up presenting a problem of how do we communicate our value to that partnership. So I'm just wondering if you have experiences kind of relating your value back to the value of the partnership as a whole, usually to parties sort of outside of that partnership, because our partners certainly see our value, but telling that story, making sure your specific value isn't getting lost in that story, and what experience you have doing that. Thanks.
April, just a question for you. Do you feel like you can articulate the value of that you're providing to the partnership and it's not being heard, or is the challenge in the articulation?
Yeah, no, I just want to always make sure in our partnerships, like the fact that we reach larger goals is really excellent, but I want to make sure that we always sustainably have the funding to do what we do.
So how do we make sure that people are aware of what we do, and that value remains a part of that larger, great body of work?
I mean, that was part of why we did that impact report, because we didn't, our website doesn't really, it lets you put some data or a report out there, but it's not a very good way to articulate how your values drive projects and what you seek to achieve. So there was a lot of concern about, like, it's not clear, like, you're going to hire us to do some mapping, great, but we're going to bring a hell of an equity lens to that mapping project if you hire us for that. And you may not want that, but that's what we do, and that's our approach. So it has to be front and center in the partnership. Well, for us, it's just clear. Like, we push for transparent process. We push for, accountability in the processes that we were involved in with community and government agencies. But for ourselves, like, we didn't make that clear enough broadly to the public that we did this work, but there was a value proposition within it all, and we cared about certain things. So sometimes you have to actually articulate that in writing clearly to the audiences you want. In the process, it should be obvious. In partnership, that stuff should be obvious. If it's not, there's a different problem. But you can also communicate it written that this is how you work and what matters.
So just responding to the question that was asked earlier. So I do think it is an important part of performance management and measurement that it tells you what you should do more of and also what you should stop doing and what you should do less of. But regarding this table here, I mean, yes, so it might be true that the middle one is the most important one, but I think the logic model we all have is that you have to do the first one and the third one to be able to do the middle one. So it's not a question of, that it's an either or. And then I think, another thought I had about this is that, the first two columns are relatively easy to measure and the third and fourth are not. So, I think that needs to factor into it as well. So sometimes you're kind of intuiting that you're going to get to the second one, and maybe, as Tom said, there's some indirect evidence or some more, ad hoc evidence for those, which I think is fine to use as well. I do wonder about the changing the mindset. I mean, sure, that's great when that happens, but I don't know that those opportunities are always there, and I'm not sure that's always the point. I mean, I don't think that everyone needs their mindset changed. I think there's some people who know exactly what we need to be doing, and we need to be supporting and reinforcing them. So, I think that happens sometimes, and that can be a big aha, but I think that sometimes it's a little more boring than we're making it sound.
I'm actually having like an epiphany with what Pat described yesterday about how NNIP's influence has network properties. And I feel like in the end, that's what we each do in each one of our cities, is that we enable other people to do things, and we are effectively a part of a network. And so I'm thinking maybe we need to bring in some of those network measures that because we supported that partner, they were able to do that work in order to get that outcome. And so maybe there are network-based performance measures that we could really think through what we might all contribute to, and then a little bit of a plug. The ultimate, kind of theoretically, these indicators are supposed to be embedded into our cities, that it's like trying to get the performance measure of air, right? It's just something that you're going to need, and we're all going to need it in our cities, and eventually that's what we all want to become. And so Sabina and I are actually going to be talking about embeddedness of our projects in Philadelphia at the ACSP meeting, so if you're there in Philadelphia, join us there.
Spencer from Woodstock. When I look at the chart up there, I think a lot of what we do and a lot of the data we provide go to people whose mindset isn't going to change. They can use what we provide to change other people's mindsets. So one of the reports I know that we're working on building a coalition and influencing legislation. And how many other groups do we get to sign on board? How many co-sponsors do we get from the legislation? So it's not the user's mindset that changes, but the users are able to change others' mindsets and get others to take action. So maybe that, can we add that to the outcome measures?
Yeah, I think across both your and Peter's comment, you've both raised good points, a little refinement on how we present that concept. Laura's had her hand up for a while over here too.
I can yield to Laura if she's had her hand up longer.
Week, so I feel like I'm entitled. I just wanted to give us as an example of somebody who radically changed what we were doing because we couldn't clearly tell that what we were doing was making a difference. And when I first came on board in 2010, we spent a lot of time and money putting together a website with a lot of data on it, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, I redesigned it in my head on the plane on the way home from NNIP and went from there. And we monitored our Google Analytics, and we had, like 4 visits a year and a 0% bounce rate. And then it would go to 5, and I'd be all happy. And then one day, suddenly we had 20,000 visits, and I couldn't quite figure out what was happening until I discovered that the city had linked to us from their website. So some geek somewhere in the city of San Antonio decided that we had something vaguely cool, and they linked to us, but we still couldn't tell in all the data why people were coming other than, that's interesting, and our bounce rate went up to 50%. And so there just wasn't really any clear return on that particular investment. And around that same time, San Antonio got all these different place-based initiatives. And people, real-world people, had real-world urgent questions that they needed data to answer. And so we shifted radically in that direction. And it's, if you don't do any of that, I would recommend doing some of it. It's good for morale. If it's system-level evaluations or something, there's some concrete, they have a question and you answered it and you all move on, and then there's another one on Tuesday. So I think we'll probably swing back toward the middle, but we just responded very directly to information that we could be doing something much more valuable than what we had been doing.
I just wanted to make a quick follow-up on what Peter and Spencer were saying too, that if we're looking at changing mindset, maybe that's not, again, that's something that's much harder to quantify, obviously, but thinking about how we're following up with recipients of all of our work to see whether or not it was successful for them. Did it achieve their goal, like Rebecca said? And I think that's kind of maybe more of what it should be. And we've talked a couple times in various conversations this week about how people are going to use data for all types of purposes, not always the ones we want them to even. And given that, I think just knowing that people who can get access to the data use it for something that's successful for them, that would probably be a more, empirical way of looking at it as much as that's possible.
Just want to thank Rebecca and Spike for presenting their views of what they're doing in their city. I want to thank all of you for a great conversation and for helping Tom and I, for you joining us on this journey of bringing this information up to current and helping refine it. We'll be sending out more material over email, and I imagine there'll be an unconference sometime soon about this too. So, and if you have comments or questions or things you're doing that we should know about that add value to this, we'd love to hear about them. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Tom.
That was